Okay, so I'm here with my friend Joni Petrie. It's the Gemini twins, the man with the club and the woman with the musical instrument. doing a hangout today where we're going to talk about the greatness of the sidereal tradition of Vedic astrology. As you know, it's now time where we've been really talking a lot about this, and I wanted to have my good friend Joni on because she's a wealth of knowledge, of course, about Vedic astrology, but especially Joni's one of the few who really made the big transition from Western astrology to Vedic astrology. We're going to talk about the usage of nakshatras, rashis, and of course Joni uses outer planets. And we're also doing this at a very interesting and sort of auspicious time because we just had several planets move. Jupiter just moved into Sidereal Libra. The nodes just changed. So we're going to be talking about all that kind of stuff. Joni, lovely to see you.
Thank you. And thank you, Sam. This is such an honor to be with you and get to talk about the things that we love the most, which is astrology. Absolutely. And, it's like we didn't choose astrology. Astrology chose us. It's like, it's a calling when you're this immersed into something this beautiful. And as you know, I have been doing astrology my whole life, ever since I was a teenager. And, I started in the 70s calculating charts by hand. We had no computers. Yeah. So this really was a meditation when you're calculating a chart and you're putting together and you understand the sidereal time and the longitude latitudes. It really is a meditation in astrology. So I just wanted to give you a little background of all the different things that I've gone through to get to Vedic astrology.
Absolutely. Yeah, and just one thing, especially for us like Westerners, we weren't raised in the culture like me too. I was raised in like rural Maryland. So to come to to come to yoga and meditation, it's really because we've just been sort of driven. But love to hear your story because it's you've been doing it longer than me, but I've certainly also for 25 years or so at least studying astrology off and on. Western astrology didn't really hook me, but of course I also knew my Western placements in the tropical, and I definitely found a lot in it, and I know a lot of tropical astrologers and whatnot, but the Vedic system, that holistic system, especially with nakshatras and with that integrated system, just really grabbed my heart. So it's the same. Love to hear your story. Let's hear it.
Well, it was a long journey and a long search because, back in the day when I started, there wasn't the internet, and the only books out there were pretty sparse and not very good, and the only good ones were the Western astrology books. And I didn't even know when I started that there was Vedic astrology. The way I came upon understanding there was a different astrology was reading the autobiography of a yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda. And when I realized that his guru was a Vedic astrologer, I'm like, what's that? And I remember in high school, I used to carry around the book, the autobiography, and in study hall, I would read it. And people would ask me, who is that lady on the cover of the book? And I was like, I'm not even going there. Let me remind you, I'm in Dallas, Texas.
Right.
It's a little bit more conservative than where you grew up. So, but
I grew up in very rural Maryland. So anyway, we won't go there.
Yeah. So what I started with was, of course, Western astrology, but I explored every avenue. Let me tell you, I had a metaphysical center, and this was in the early 90s. It was first the Dallas Metaphysical Center, and then it became the Galactic Center. Okay. And I would teach all aspects of astrology. I mean, I went from heliocentric to the diurnal charts, to Uranian astrology, to asteroids. I mean, I studied it all before I came to Vedic astrology. I will say this, though. Uranian astrology was probably the most accurate that I found before I came into Vedic, because what it does is it uses aspects. And when you're looking at Vedic astrology and Western astrology, the aspects are always the same.
Right. Well, that's one of the reasons why when people say, well, which is right, I always say that both systems work because most things are common between the system.
Right.
And there are no lines in the sky. So even the whole thing about the zodiac, even as I've been saying, as I've been talking about it, because aspects are the same. Usually houses are very close to the same. And particularly I find with Vedic aspects, because they're so specific and it's not like every aspect is always on. But anyway, not to interrupt, but I totally hear what you're saying. This is why both systems work.
Right, because of the aspects. And you know, when I'm doing world predictions, we don't have the luxury of looking at houses in the sky. We're looking at where the planets are relative to each other. And that doesn't matter if you're doing Western or Vedic. But when you start to include the nakshatras and the fixed stars, this is where it really takes off and makes a difference. And I could go back to many of my predictions to validate that these nakshatras that are true to the stars. This is what I love about Vedic astrology. It's true to the stars and the stars' movements as they move. You know, when I think about the fixed stars, like the eye of the bull, Aldebaran, how can you say it's in Gemini? I mean, it is definitely in Taurus. And then it was the summer last year, 2016, when Saturn and Mars aligned around 15, 16 degrees of Scorpio, which is conjunct Antares. On that day, there was the attack in Nice, France. And, you know, and I was saying, you know, look out, this is going to happen. Then the other variable that I think is probably the most important tool as an astrologer for prediction are the eclipses. Because when we're dealing with eclipses, of course, we're dealing with Rahu and Ketu, and this cycle is so vitally important. So the signs that I find the eclipses occur in the Sidereal Zodiac, by the way, Sidereal means star, in the Sidereal Zodiac, they truly align with the meanings of the nakshatras and the signs, and this is how I make my predictions.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, just to say, I totally hear you the same way and feel it. And in particular, you know, one of the things to understand is that those ancient portions, those sidereal portions, preclude any revision. This actually goes back into the time, even before we were in the Kali Yuga and all of this. This is back in the ancient Vedic times, back in the Yajurveda. In my recent research, I've shown that everything was measured sidereally. Like the zodiac itself is how we measure things. It is the sky.
Right.
When we take the seasons on Earth and we project that into the sky, it mixes up the measurement because all the ancient cultures measured things moving with the stars and the sidereal portions. And so, as you said, Aldebaran as being the eye of the bull, that's been back into the wisdom age. That was back into the enlightened age. And so it's totally true. And obviously with all the other nakshatras as well, and through other cultures, because this is also true in Mayan culture, Egyptian culture, the same common mythologies.
Right, and you know, how can we deny the fact that astronomically, according to astronomers, that these are the placements of where the planets are relative to the stars? This is astronomically correct. And you know, all the ancients built their structures according to the stars. Even Washington, D.C. is built in accordance to the stars. We're aligning with the stars, and in the signs that the Sidereal Zodiac is aligned with truly is so precise. And when I switched from Western astrology, and by the way, there's that, you know, I spent years defending astrology just all by itself here in Texas, you know, just, you know, people ask me, do you believe in Jesus?
Just not believing in it,
Oh my God. So all of that I had to defend with astrology. Then I came into defending Vedic astrology to Western astrologers. And you know, I really have a problem with people that have never practiced something, that have an opinion, have such a strong opinion about it. For example, people that don't even know what astrology is, but they have such a strong opinion. And now the tropical Western astrologers have such a strong opinion about a system they've never practiced. So I have the opinion that I can say something about both systems because I've practiced both.
Yeah, well, that's one of the reasons why, well, I mean, there's a lot of reasons why I wanted to talk with you, but of course I know, and especially some folks like yourself who, like I say, I actually never started practicing Western astrology. Of course, I knew all my Western placements. I'm, you know, Cancer and Moon in Scorpio, Moon Neptune in Scorpio. And I mean, I have Western astrologers that just nail it because frankly, their system works well, especially within the system that it's
Right.
that it's using. But especially Vedic astrology was just, it's clear that it was never conceived any other than sidereally. There's never been any tradition of tropical, using tropical zodiac because of that stellar integrity and the nakshatra portions that overlay perfectly with the, with the 12, 30-degree solar portions.
Right.
And so, especially once you get into the innate connections between Rashi and nakshatra, just one to mention, and again, it's the one that we're talking about today. It's the Ardra nakshatra. I find this to be one of the most amazing because actually, of course, it's in Gemini, and this is actually the portion of sky that is really related to Lord Shiva, because Lord Shiva's original name was Rudra, and especially I think it's in South India, they actually call Ardra, it's actually a Rudra. That's actually what Ardra, that's where it comes from. And there's a facet of Shiva that's called Ardhanarishvara. I don't know if you know this facet of Shiva, but it's actually half man, half woman. Mm-hmm. And it's the only deity that I've seen of the Trimurti between Brahma, Shiva, and Vishnu, where you have one god is basically androgynous. It's actually the masculine and feminine in one aspect. And that's so Gemini-like.
Yeah.
To have Shiva as Ardhanishvara.
Oh, yeah.
And so, again, so Gemini-like. And Ardra as being right on the plane of the galaxy and being that very sort of destructive, Ardra and Mula, that Ardra Mula axis is so transformative, like with 9/11 and whatnot. And this is this is also that Gemini Sagittarius those two dual masculine signs are full of change and destruction and transformation. So again,
absolutely.
And again, this is where you see that Ardra Mula axis right there on the plane of the galaxy. And again, so all of that astronomy lines up perfectly with the signs as well.
It does. But when I think about different astrologies, each culture has their astrology. Yeah. There's Chinese astrology, there's Mayan astrology. Right. And I think that sometimes their astrology fits their culture more.
Absolutely.
And I always assumed that Western astrology fit the Western culture more because it was more psychologically based, it was more surface, it was more superficial in a sense. So I've always told people, and I haven't done all the research that you have done, going back to, the ancient texts and things like that. I just applied it.
Yeah.
So what I find with Western astrology is it's more about personality analysis, but Vedic astrology, I always tell people, is true to your soul because it aligns with the nakshatras.
That's what the stars are.
And the nakshatra means that which never decays. So it really does talk more to your soul than your personality. Now, for example, you and I are Gemini Lagnas, we're Gemini ascendants. So when I first got into Western astrology, I so associated with my Cancer ascendant in Western astrology. I thought, I'm sensitive, emotional, family oriented. But really and truly, look what I do.
Oh, absolutely.
I travel, I write books, I talk to people all day, and everything about communications.
Right.
It's Gemini. So that's really truly my soul essence. I'm Gemini in that.
Mine actually stays the same. I actually wind up being the Gemini ascendant in both, but other things shift. Like it winds up being a Cancer sun and all that. But but it's so true. And one of the things that I did say, like in my research, and again, I have respect for all traditions. I even have respect for people that want to mix zodiacs if they want, but it's just not really the Vedic tradition at that point, like you said. And one of the things that I've noticed, especially about the Western approach to astrology and the use of their zodiac that's changing all the time, is you also see how Western astrology has changed so much, where they start assigning different rulerships and things change. They bring in outer planets, they bring in all this stuff because the system itself is less stable. And I use the word stable just to mean that we practice Vedic astrology still as it was developed thousands of years ago. Like it really hasn't changed in the way we study it. Whereas with Western astrology, they don't really honor, it's hard to find even really powerful Western astrologers these days that have read all the text or that know the books or that know that tradition. Whereas in India, this is what I meant even when I said before that it was stable, it means that to not practice Indian astrology in its traditional form is really kind of an abomination. Whereas most Western astrologers, they don't really even know who Vedic Valens is or really any of the traditions. So
yeah. So here's another thing that I always think about. Western astrologers take into account precession of the equinoxes and the fact that we are in the age of Pisces, but they don't apply it in individual natal charts. So, I mean, precession is real. 2,000 years ago when we started the age of Pisces, look what came about. They make it relative to the birth of Christ, but all the churches and all the beliefs began during that time. And as we edge closer to the age of Aquarius, technology and science are all coming out of this. So, I mean, this is real. The precession is real.
Yeah.
And so the Vedic, let me just say this. When I shifted to Vedic, my readings became so much more accurate. I used to sit with the Western chart and the Vedic chart when I first was switching over. And it became time and time again that I didn't need the Western chart anymore. The Vedic took over. It was just so much more precise and accurate. I could make predictions that I could never make in Western astrology. And, I was sold. There's no going back after that. Trust me.
Yeah. And it's really interesting because I've definitely, when I started, I gathered like every sort of technique that you can. I mean, Ashtaka Varga, I did a lot with Shadpala, I did a lot with really kind of everything. But then over time, my practice just whittled down to like the 10 or 15 really important things, like really delving deep into the planets as house rulers, the rulerships and the yogas and everything that revolves around actually things like yoga, like my yoga and Vedic astrology. Joni has a book too that she just wrote, but all of the things that really underpinned things from my yoga practice. But the point is that I know people like yourself who even use outer planets and who use other things that aren't in the core of Vedic astrology, but it's still like I certainly see the validity of outer planets, and I do use them and look at them for generational things and things like that you make that you base some of your world predictions on, and you do a great job at it. I haven't even really felt the need to embrace those things. But the bottom line is that all of it revolves around the Sidereal Zodiac. Like when I actually tried to get an article in the Mountain Astrologer several years ago about the current outer planets in the Sidereal. And I started talking about some of the stuff that's happening now, especially when Pluto went into Sagittarius and all of this a few years ago. And I got really big on it, but then I just kind of let it go because it wasn't part of my everyday practice. But totally everything revolving around that sidereal integrity. And I'd love you to tell us about your outer planet experiences.
Yes, absolutely, because that was one of the reasons why it took me a little longer to convert to Vedic, because they didn't use the outer planets, and I knew that they worked because I worked with them in my practice, for 20 years before, and they worked.
I agree.
So I look at them as the outer planets really do bring in a collective unconsciousness that when you use them, you can predict world events because they're the collective and they stay in a sign for so long. They're what form generations, and their aspects to each other are what really can form major events and the type of generations that go on.
Pluto squares.
Yeah, exactly. So, during the 60s, all the children of the 60s, they have Uranus conjunct Pluto. And that's all of the revolutionary change that occurred in the 60s. I mean, you may not remember, but sometimes when I reminisce back, when I hear some of those old songs by Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, and I think about the 60s, Ohio with, talking about Nixon, nobody knows what really went on. All the racism, it was horrible.
I was born in 63. I was born a few months before JFK.
Okay, so what went on. I mean, the Vietnam War, and the government went into universities and killed kids. I mean, this was like, you think things are crazy now, when I think back, but that's all the revolutionary change of the people fighting back to the status quo of the government.
Right.
And look what they did. You know, look at the change that has been created from this. That's the Uranus-Pluto conjunction. And you have it in your chart.
Oh, I have it, yeah.
That. You're part of that revolutionary change. And
right. I have Mars, Uranus, Pluto. I have, when you look at my Vedic chart, I have it all in Leo. Mars, Uranus, Pluto, and Leo.
Yeah, that's incredibly powerful. So, I mean, that's the power of these outer planets depicting generational change and their aspects. And my book prior to the one I just wrote, Secrets of Prediction, I go over all of these hard aspects between the outer planets. I look at things as layers. The biggest cyclic process is precession. Then the next layer of the cyclic process is the outer planets to the outer planets, because they depict generational changes. And let me tell you, when one of those outer planets was discovered, that's when whatever it was all about came into reality and consciousness in the world. For example,
when Pluto was discovered, we discovered nuclear energy.
Yes, and when Neptune was discovered, we discovered photography and film, and the silent films and movies, because it's imaging and making things seem real that are not real. And then
how do you see that now with the shifts, with the sidereal shifts? Because we have Uranus is now in Aries, right, and Neptune in Aquarius.
Yeah, and you know what's just happening right now is Jupiter's about to oppose Uranus.
Right.
And that's going to be some kind of awakening, because I consider Uranus the great awakener. And you know what else? It rules astrology.
Right.
So the fact that, you know, it's about the collective change and the rebelliousness of those that want to wake up the world.
Right.
And that's basically what we're doing today.
Absolutely. and you know, what's also funny is because we planned this last week, we had a brief chat, and I didn't realize at the time I was about to go away to a festival and whatnot, and you were, you were in your thing as well, but I didn't even realize that as we were going to have this conversation today, again, we just had Jupiter move into Libra, and the nodes shift. So we've just had two major sidereal shifts, and I was chatting with you before we started that, especially that Jupiter moving into Libra, I'm sure that we both predicted, because one of the things that I've also noticed with us sidereal astrologers, all of us astrologers who are making world predictions all the time and doing constant updates, we're following sidereal. So we're sort of putting it on the line all the time. I don't know how many videos I've been doing. I did a whole webinar on Jupiter ingress into Libra. And here we see very quickly, even with President Trump, who has certainly been a fighter, we see since Jupiter has started to ingress into Libra, now we see the news is he's making peace with Nancy Pelosi, and the big news has been that he's reaching across the aisle, and the Republicans are scratching their head like, whoa, where's our big fighter gone? But both of us have made the prediction recently that it's time where we're going to be looking to reach consensus, and here we see as soon as the ingress starts.
I know. As soon as
scratching our heads like, what's going on with the president?
I know. And you know, here's the thing, it's about peace. I mean, Libra is the symbol, is the scales, bringing balance back. We're so ready for that after all this intense energy.
Yeah.
And you know, Rahu just shifted into Cancer and K2 into Capricorn. Yeah, and that's another whole balance act going on.
That's what I mean. We have both of these huge shifts happening right now. And as I say, God knows we need it, but we certainly see Jupiter's a little more clearly because, well, first of all, it's quicker. And also the nodes, they're a little more shadowy and they take a little bit longer. But we also see because, and again, this is another huge principle when you start using the integral zodiac, we've seen all of the flooding and the extreme heat in the US with Rahu hanging around this Gandanta point between Magha and Aslesha. And depending on the nodal calculation that you use, if you use the true node, Rahu had been in Magha for much of the time, but if you use the mean node, Rahu had already been in Cancer. Right. So either way, and also Saturn sitting at the Gandanta point in Scorpio, we see all of this watery stuff and all of this heat, all of this hot stuff. Right. You know, but anyway, seeing Rahu shift and literally cross over the Gandanta point with both calculations shows, you know, also shows a shift, hopefully away from so much bravado and empire. Because the thing of Rahu going through Leo was all this empire. not just the U.S. empire, but also like North Korea and Putin and all this emphasis on empire.
Exactly. That is, I mean, well made point there, because, you know, we wouldn't have these Gandanta planets if we weren't looking at the Sidereal Zodiac.
Yeah, there is no Gandanta, and that's in every Vedic astrological text. Again, there's no other way it's in every text. I think Russia has like 7 chapters dedicated to every Gandanta. Like, like the Aslesha Magha, the Jeshta Mula, and then just the blemishes of the Gandanta, and every text, Paladipika, Jataka, all of them talk about it.
Right. So let me explain what Gandanta is for those that may not know. Gandanta is when planets are in the very last degrees of water or the very first degrees of fire. And what Gandanta literally translates to is drowning.
Drowning, yeah.
And here we have these floods in Houston, then in Florida, which I actually predicted a month before, because I knew
everyone's in India.
Yeah, in India, of course. How can I forget that? There were even worse there around Nepal and India. Yeah. So this is Gandanta, drowning, and what it can mean figuratively is losing control. Everyone felt like they're losing control, and there's so much anger out there. Yeah. And now all of a sudden, I don't know about you, but I feel like I can take a breath of fresh air, and I don't feel that. I don't feel all that hostility anymore. And
just feeling that shift. Once planets, like I did a video update yesterday, just the fact that they're like Jupiter is like not even a degree, it's just like half a degree, but it's like once it crosses that breach, it just crosses that breach, then people feel like, see, because what happens when it's at the edge of one waning and it's not quite in the next yet, we're just not confident in what that thing symbolizes. So with Jupiter, it's like, what's going to be the next inspiration? Like, because the inspiration from Virgo is kind of like on the waning, like, and we're sort of in the negative quality of what's inspiring us about Virgo. It's like, oh, nothing really inspires us. This is sort of cranky thing. But as soon as it crosses over into Libra, then, I mean, literally even like a day or like a day or two after, then it's like, oh, this is going to inspire me. Connecting with people, consensus. Like as soon as it crosses over, and by the way, this is why I've been using Sidereal forever, because the same thing. As soon as you see it cross over, then you see the next inspiration trigger. And I base my work on it. Like I sent out newsletters to people that want to join my certification course, because people have just been hesitating. As soon as it crosses over, I know that people are going to be ready to go, okay, finally.
Exactly.
And it's real stuff.
We can feel the energy change. And, even the weather here in Dallas is cool. Usually in September, it is hot. And I think that when planets go into air signs, we usually have cooler weather. Yeah. I remember when Saturn and Rahu were together in Libra, we had the coldest winter we've ever had. For a while.
Oh, yeah, that was 2012,
Yeah, so I mean, but you'll see the weather, everything is affected. And so when I'm looking at going back to the outer planets, when we look at the eclipses, which I said are usually the most profound place, because what are eclipses? They're when the sun and the moon come together with Rahu and Ketu.
And the orbits of sun, moon, and earth line up in that three-dimensional thing.
So, here we're talking about, we're in a place of duality with the sun, the moon, and what's the third variable? The earth. When all of this aligns with Rahu and Ketu, this is a time of destiny. This is a time of uncovering. Things come out of the dark that we didn't know about. Think about what an eclipse is all about. It's the shadow. It's the covering of the light. So within that darkness, we come into a place where we can truly see things that we couldn't see before. So eclipses are a very powerful, important thing. And I always tell everyone, if you're wondering what an eclipse is going to be about, what that secret or what that thing is that you're here to discover about yourself or the world, go back to 18.5 years ago when this happened before. And that's how you'll get a sense of what will happen in this time and period of your life. But what I look for with the eclipses is, first of all, are they conjunct outer planets? Because this will depict some incredible changes going on globally. And these eclipses that were happening over the last year and a half, K2 was with Neptune. And that's all about uncovering secrets and things that we didn't know about.
Especially, and we can bring in the, I'm sorry, just forgive me a second, but we can bring in the Zodiac as well. It was in Aquarius.
Exactly, I agree. And yes, I always look at, those are the variables, the outer planets, the signs, the nakshatras. Oh my God, the nakshatras give so much meaning to where the eclipses are occurring. Just like you said previously, when we were talking about how this eclipse that just occurred, this total solar eclipse in Maga. And this is about our forefathers, the you know, who came before, and here this whole teaching of sidereal Vedic astrology from our ancestors is surfacing for us to reanalyze, look at, and see the importance of it, because that's what our forefathers do for us.
And a couple things, and you can also see this, how it played out politically in the US with all that stuff about the Confederacy. I was saying this at the time, same thing. You see these people fired up about their ancestry. I mean, literally statues of their ancestry.
There you go. I mean, it's amazing, isn't it?
And I just want to say, a few years ago, and the reason that I brought up Neptune in Aquarius is because this was back, you know, I was telling you back in the time when I was looking to maybe do some articles. I said this years ago when Neptune went into Aquarius, which was what, 7 or 8 years ago? I'm sorry, I don't remember now.
Neptune, when it first went in?
Yeah.
Well, let's see. It was probably about 6 years. Yeah, right, exactly.
And I predicted then, when I was looking at it more, that it's going to show social, like I said at the time, that all the international boundaries between cultures is just going to dissolve. That includes international, you know, like instead of being, I'm American, you're this, none of it is going to be as important anymore. All that's going to dissolve, mainly because of the internet, commerce, all of this stuff. It's all just going to be democratized. All cultures are going to be one global culture, rather than I'm a citizen of this country, you're a citizen of that. It's going to all start to merge together at some point, and we're going to realize that we all need each other. Very simple. And it's going to create confusion in the hierarchy of cultures and all that stuff. And so obviously this is purely Neptune in sidereal.
Right.
And of course in Western it's in Pisces, which, and again, there's certainly a legitimacy to say, well, it's about religion and religious fervor or things like that, perhaps. I totally get it, but certainly the way I would analyze it is exactly the things that you're saying, and the things that we're seeing more culturally.
Right, exactly. So the sign, the nakshatra, and then taking it down to the eclipses. If you're looking at the eclipses, are they conjunct Jupiter, Saturn? These are the social planets. These will have an effect on the economy. Are they conjunct the faster moving planets, you know, Mercury? And if you'll notice, another thing that is vitally important that will go across the board, whether you're using Western or Vedic, is the stationing of planets.
Oh, absolutely.
When planets slow down and station, they make their mark. And I find it fascinating that this last solar eclipse at 4 degrees of Leo was where Mars and Mercury came together and conjoined. And it sort of like brought up the arguments and the angers in the world. But now, like we see Jupiter going into Libra and that dissipating and separating, we're coming to a place of peace. So this is how we can see the trends in the world. And by the way, I want to show everybody, this is my book that I just came up with, Rahu and Ketu, Our Karmic Destiny Through Eclipses, because what I talk about is the eclipses, and the eclipses, how they affect you personally. And I am looking at the Sidereal Zodiac, and what I do in this book, which I think is so meaningful, is I not only go to where your Rahu and Ketu are by sign, which is sidereal, but the dispositor of Rahu and Ketu in your chart. Those will give you the indications of your karma, your destiny, what it is you're here to really discover and learn and grow through in this lifetime. That's so pertinent and so easy to be revealed through Rahu and Ketu, plus noticing at the time of eclipses when you will come into this realization of what you've come here to grow through and learn in this lifetime. That's why we're here. We're
Yeah,
here
and
to
you'll
grow.
see. Thank you. Yeah, awesome. People should obviously check it out. Joni's written stuff. Joni's written a lot of books. What, you've written like 4 or 5 books now at this point, right?
Well, actually, I've written about 8, but 5 have been published. There's some that I just didn't get out there, but anyway, yeah. And I also have a university just like you where I teach Vedic astrology. I've been teaching Vedic astrology for 20 years now. I know the experiential process of what the Sidereal Zodiac can give.
Yeah, once you've been teaching as much as we have, you're kind of like, all right.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, oh, what are we talking about here?
And I don't need all the proof in the scriptures. It works so in the process. And, I do a lot of readings. I'm in the trenches. I do 4 to 5 readings a day. And by being in the trenches, every single chart that I do, I learn something new.
Right.
And I love that. And I love doing readings for people because I get to be involved in their lives and learn about, everybody's got a story and it's fascinating.
Yeah.
Every single chart I do, I get to live their life.
Yeah,
and
we learn so much. This is one of the things I tell my students as well. I encourage them to start doing some readings that they're comfortable with, because you really also don't learn until you start readings, because you see people whose karmas are ripe. And if you're just a student constantly, then you're not seeing people on the knife edge of karma. So you can't really even test your techniques, because things aren't happening when you're just sort of playing with your friends. They don't really have a lot going on. I wanted to just say this though as well, because especially about the difference between the Gandanta points and the points where most of the time there's a nakshatra bridge between 2 rashis. And the difference between that and those points where the water sign ends and the fire sign begins, both nakshatra and rashi end.
I never thought about that in that respect. You are so right.
Oh yeah, and one of the main things that I just taught a full nakshatra immersion here in San Diego, just to my certification course students about a month ago. But one of the things that I've always done, and one of the things that I do when I explain nakshatras, is how the other nakshatras, especially the ones that bridge the rashis, are actually a version of both signs. Like for instance, Kritika is the bridge between Taurus and Aries. So this is why Kritika is related to like the fire pit, because you have the fire of Aries and the enclosure of Taurus. So it's literally Agni, and Agni is seen in the sacrificial fire when you build the fire pit. So this fire pit is the incarnation basically of Kritika, between the fire of Aries and the stability of Taurus. And then you have between Taurus and Gemini, you have Mrigashira. Look at Mrigashira. It's a deer. It's kind of like a cow, and it's kind of like 2 people. It's kind of like so it has the restlessness and the curiosity and the movement of Gemini, and the stability and the beauty and the animal. It's literally an animal of Taurus. So it's like between the bull and the 2 people, you have Mrigashira, and it's the same energy. And obviously you see the first part of when someone has Mrigashira in Taurus, very different than Mrigashira in Gemini. I happen to have 3 planets in Mrigashira in Gemini. If they were in Taurus a few degrees earlier, it would be a very different energy. And it is a very different energy. And so again, when people start breaking nakshatras up, it had nothing to do with the rashis, it's almost hard to believe, frankly, to someone who has looked at this so much, when you see a nakshatra like Swati, which is surely in Libra, pure air. It's the one nakshatra that's purely in the air sign, because this is the other thing to look at. The air and earth signs only have one nakshatra that's totally in it. For instance, the air signs, it's the Rahu-related nakshatra. So for Gemini, it's Ardra, and then Swati for Libra, and then Shatabishak. And all of the other ones are partially in other signs. So you can really see that Libra is more like Swati than the others, because it's that nakshatra, purely in it. Gemini is more like Ardra. Shatabishak is more reflective of Aquarius. And in the water signs, you'll have, for instance, Rohini, right? The eye of the bull. That's the one that's fully in Taurus. And then Hasta is the one that's fully in Virgo. And again, how can we say Hasta is actually in Libra? I mean, How do you say Swati is actually in the same section of sky as Scorpio? And again, when we break it apart, then we're looking at one section of sky and calculating it two ways. And it's like, this just is so unintuitive.
Right. Well, all I have to say is that, you know, with working with the systems, this works. And the predictive techniques, oh my God, the predictive is so precise. And that's what brought me to Vedic, because I wanted to be able to predict precisely, because that's when my clients come to me. They don't come to me to know about their personality. They want to know when things are going to happen so that they can prepare and plan their lives accordingly. And this is what Vedic astrology does. It's the accuracy of the transits. Now the transits, let me remind you, will be happening in the Western chart as well.
Right.
But the house rulers, of course, change, and that's where I can make the precise predictions based on the house rulers.
Absolutely, yeah, totally. It's the same thing with me. The rulerships. I mean, this is again. This was the reason when I started actually looking at seeing how that would ever work. I mean, rulerships just go bananas. I don't see how anyone can apply rulerships to this zodiac. I mean, not to mention the unintuitive, you know, relationship that I just mentioned, that nakshatras don't line up with rashis anymore, which just doesn't make any sense. But then once you start to break apart the chart and look at the rulerships, none of the karmas unfold based on rulerships anymore.
Right.
Well,
and let me remind you, when I use the outer planets, I do not use them as ruling signs, because that would destroy the Vedic perfect system that they have. So I include them as the generational collective unconscious, but the Vedic system I use pure as the ancients taught, you know, in terms of the old rulerships, and they work incredible. The Mula Trikona signs, the exaltation signs. I mean, how can you not see how when a planet is exalted or debilitated, that this has such a powerful effect? This is only in the sidereal system that we could see these sign placements in terms of Mula Trikona, exaltation, debilitation, and you know, looking at the Navamsha chart.
Right.
If you have a debilitated planet that goes to its exaltation sign in the Navamsha, you see a complete different energy change as people go to the second part of their life. And vice versa, if they have a debilitated sign, I mean, an exalted sign in the birth chart, and in the Navamsha, it goes to, you know, reversal. You'll see the reversal in the second part of their life. And another rule that really works well, I'm sure you use it, Sam, is when you have an exalted planet that's retrograde, it becomes like a debilitated planet. Have you seen that work?
Well, what I notice is that, you know, the rules for retrograde and dignity, like the exalted retrograde or the debilitated retrograde, tends to reverse.
Right.
I don't literally apply the it becomes like. I use those kind of rules. The way here's how I perceive it is that, for instance, I've seen, especially when you get retrograde and debilitated Jupiter, I find, and retrograde and a debilitated Saturn, it tends to minimize the problem of the dignity, because when a planet is retrograde, we don't act on it so quickly. We actually reflect on it more. And it's better when we're hesitating to act on something that's in low dignity, because when its dignity is low, it tends to be confused, for sure. And its higher functions aren't as easily available. So it's good that we hesitate and not trust it. And retrograde is where we hesitate. Whereas if it's a high dignity, like if it's a retrograde Jupiter, but it's exalted, we're supposed to act on that. And the fact that we're hesitating on that thing that's very developed minimizes its ability to help us. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I get it. I get it.
So it's just bringing in, it's just factoring in the quality of retrograde and our capacity to hesitate. It's good if we're hesitating on something that's not so powerful, but it's not so beneficial if we're supposed to be trusting that exalted Saturn.
Right. Well, but I have seen, like, for some famous people that I've looked at their charts, such as Meryl Streep. She has debilitated Jupiter, ruler of her 10th house.
Right.
But it's retrograde.
Right. Well, absolutely,
And
especially.
you know, and here she is, this, you know, star that's won more Academy Awards than anyone. How can you say her Jupiter's debilitated?
You say that it's in her 10th house or that it rules her 10th house?
No, it rules the 10th house.
What's the lugna?
Let's see. It's got to be
Pisces
Cancer.
or Gemini?
It's Cancer because it's in her 7th house. Retrograde debilitated. And she
what's
did
the ascendant again? What did you say with it?
Cancer.
Oh,
She lost her first husband. He died of cancer too, because it was in the 7th. But my point is with this, not to get off on another tangent, my point is we couldn't see that these planets were in these signs if we weren't using the Sidereal Zodiac.
Right.
And it's so, and it makes such a powerful impact to see this.
Yeah.
It just really does make the prediction what it is. And I could see this using the tropical zodiac. None of this would come alive, nor the nakshatra use that we're talking about that is, I mean, so profound. I can tell people things that I never, ever could surmise from Western tropical astrology. It's tropical astrology to me is surface. And that might be why the sun sign works so well.
Yeah.
Because it's like it's based on the sun and the seasons. So we do kind of resonate to that sun sign astrology that, you know, came out in the late 60s, 70s.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But the thing is about that sun sign astrology, it's just so surface. And remember this, you know this, I always say that tropical astrology is solar based, whereas Vedic astrology is lunar based. It's all based on the moon in terms of when we're planning our dashas. Our whole dasha system's based on the placement of our natal moon. So it's such a lunar based system.
Yeah, and one of the things people should know as well is that the you know what the tropical zodiac is basically, and it happened in Greece in the 1st century. There are a lot of experts who feel like they were trying to make a better calendar because this was what was happening at that time. Claudius Ptolemy was a Roman living in Alexandria of Greek ancestry. This was what was happening. And at the time, they had just started like the Julian calendar in Rome and whatnot, and they were trying to codify the calendar. And the 12 portions that existed were the 12 zodiac signs. And so they pinned the vernal equinox to the zodiac. Right. Rather than keeping the zodiac connected to the 12 months of a calendar, the zodiac portions, the 12 zodiac portions became joined the vernal equinox. And so from that point on, at least in Alexandria and Greece, they started calculating the zodiac, which are, again, objects moving around the earth. That's what the zodiac is.
Right.
It's finding where objects are moving around the earth. But that then became associated with the seasons on earth.
Yes.
So we then started to project seasons on earth into the sky. And so this is the difference. I mean, whether one believes one is better or not, it's important to understand actually what they are rather than this one and there's that one. Whereas the sidereal is literally the placements in the sky, literally, like, that have always been calculated based on exact degrees. And there are issues with ionomtia, like exactly where do you calculate that? And these are the things that we work through as we become more sophisticated in our ability to calculate those things. And that's also part of it, but it's very different than saying, well, because we're not exactly sure where the ionomtia is, we're going to use tropical zodiac. It's
right. And you know, another thing that I brought into my practice was looking at declination.
Oh, yeah.
When we're looking at, you know, these measurements in the sky and according to the ecliptic and all of that, you know, these are all measurements, like you're saying, that the tropical or the sidereal are taking into account. But declination is the same, no matter if you're looking at the tropical or the sidereal zodiac. What is declination? It's the measurement of, that if you take the ecliptic, what's above the ecliptic or what's below the ecliptic. And so essentially what I say is that we're looking at longitude of planets up and down, but when you look at the declination, you're looking at the horizontal across. Right. And so when you find a planet is aligned in declination, and remember for the viewers out there, when we're talking about declination, we're not talking about the degrees of the planets. Right. We're talking about how much a planet is above above the ecliptic, or how much below a planet is from the ecliptic. And the ecliptic is the path of the sun that we measure outward, this line. So there's points above and points below. So when a planet comes together by conjunction, and that would be the longitude, and it's lined up with latitude, we have that they are exactly on top of each other, because you can find a planet that's conjunct, but they are in latitude way apart.
Yeah.
And you can make a prediction more when a planet is aligned by declination and by conjunction, because they're exact. So sometimes I would find where maybe a prediction didn't hit dead on, and I would look up the declination, and that was why it was off. Or when a prediction happened exactly, they were lined up through declination and by conjunction. So and another thing that I find interesting is when a planet is out of bounds. And this, again, this is both, doesn't matter what system you're using. And what a planet is when it's out of bounds is the declination. And I find this kind of interesting that the tilt is around 23 degrees so many minutes, kind of similar to where we are in precession backwards in the zodiac right now. But anyway, the declination, when a planet is beyond the 23-degree range, it's called out of bounds. That planet is out of control. And when Mars goes out of bounds, you'll see crazy things happen on Earth. But I just wanted to make that astronomical point as well.
Oh, absolutely. Let me just ask you, because I don't work with out of bounds. Does that mean when it's above 23 degrees of ecliptic longitude in any sign? Is that what it means?
Yes, but there's only particular signs that it's usually out of bounds, and it's usually Cancer and Capricorn, because I guess they're at the solstice points, you know, because they are more out of bounds. And mainly the outer planets don't generally go out of bounds. But looking at these out of bounds, it would be either, it can be parallel or contra-parallel is what it's called. So, I mean, parallel is when they line up, but they're above, and contra-parallel is when they line up and one's below and one's above. But that isn't really out of bounds. Out of bounds can mean when it's either below or above beyond 23 degrees. I mean, above 23 degrees, not below, above 23 degrees. So it's out of bounds, and sort of like the parameters that we have associated with how we measure things. So it's symbolically out of control when it's out of bounds. Does that make sense? And you can just look up declination. When it's beyond 23 degrees, it's out of bounds.
Okay. Yeah, I don't work with that. It also sounds like it might be similar to what's called the Baladi Avashtas in Vedic astrology.
I know what that is.
Yeah, well the Baladi Avashtas is when planets, they're actually, you have four Avashtas, I'm sorry, five sections of each sign, and there's a Bala, which means infant stage, and then the last 6 degrees are Mritu, last 6 degrees of either feminine or masculine signs are what's called either the dead Avashta or the infant stage. So it shows planets at either very old or very young stage, depending on whether it's a masculine or feminine sign, and the first 6 or last 6 degrees.
Okay, so you're talking about the old age or the new, whether, and I usually, and I look at the planets when they're very early in degrees. It's like, it hasn't really resonated or got its footing yet in that sign. So it's weaker. But then I find the planets that are in the last degrees are stronger. I mean, I know they say it's old age and it's, you know, tired, burnt up. But remember, that's the Atmakarika planet, which I think is so important.
This is the thing. Well, rather than have it, you know, the way it's defined in the Baladi Avashtas is rather than to have it be sort of good or bad, it shows, because there's something very, all of it is good. And if it's a Bala stage, like for instance, the early, I believe, I'm pretty sure that it's the early stage of the masculine signs is Bala.
Okay.
And that would also be the last degrees of the feminine signs. So there's a portion of like 12 degrees. If it's the last 6 degrees of a feminine sign, which would be a earth or water sign, and then it's Bala, which means young, or the first degrees of a masculine sign, fire and air. This is the Bala of Ashto.
Okay.
So to have something be young that it doesn't mean it's weak. It means it's youthful. It's innocent.
Yeah. No,
and to have something be old, let me just say this, to have something be in the mrityu, which is the dead state, means that its karmas are finished or full, and there's like a maturity. So there's a difference. Yeah, and you translate the Sanskrit word bala means young, and mrityu, it means dead, but it also means that the karmas are dead. So when I see a planet that's mrityu avashta, then I know that it's basically, it doesn't have the same charge, you know, in the world. Just like an old person, at some point they kind of just resign themselves. They're not trying to prove something so much anymore. Well,
you know what I find is like when they're in the very early degrees, that's very energetic. Right. It's like somebody that just starts out in the world, they're excited, they're so energized, but it's not as evolved. When I find the older planets come from a place of maturity and wisdom, whereas the younger ones are just like, they can't wait to get out in the world and prove their point and
make their mistakes. Yeah. and that's what the Baladi of Ashtas are. You see, specifically because sometimes the Atmakarika, like you said, these are Atmakarika degrees. Of course, this is purely sidereal. Like for instance,
you're right.
Like for instance, my Atmakarika is Saturn, which is 29, and it's in the Bala degree because it's in a feminine sign. But if someone has 29 of a masculine sign, then it's in Mrityu. So it also shows a subtlety between whether or not that Atmakarika is more of a youthful kind of wisdom, because again, old people also become like children again.
Yeah.
Or if it's that Mrityu, which is kind of like dead and sort of waning. So anyway, it's been great talking to you, Joni. I mean, we've gone about an hour. I think that's about, I think you have to get on to some readings, don't you?
Yes, I do.
And I know we said we'd speak for an hour, and what a pleasure.
Thank you. And, you know, we're on the same wavelength. It's so interesting to see how other astrologers do their work and compare notes, because, you know, I think we should be all here sharing.
Yeah.
Because we can grow in information through sharing our information.
Yeah.
And, you know, I feel like I don't hold back on any information. I want everyone to take what I have learned and then go forward with what I've learned and develop more out of that. So we've done this research, but the future generations need to take our work and move on and expand it even more. So we're here to grow through each other and learn. You know, I've learned some things from you today. You've learned some things from me today. This is what it's all about. So I'm so glad you invited me on so that we could share. And
absolutely. And finally we get to speak, because we see each other at conferences and it's like, hey, how are you? And then it's like, we gotta go.
I know.